Wagwan, Jamaica. Welcome to Consular Conversations Live. Joining me here today is Immigrant Officer So sorry about that, facing some technical issues. But just to repeat, joining me here today is Immigrant Officer April, and I'm your host, ACS Officer Andrew. So I just want to remind everyone, this is our last show of the year. Our next show will be January 24th at 1 o'clock. So that is the fourth Wednesday of January. And today we are going to discuss immigrant visas specifically and cover the theme of boarding foils. You can follow us live on Facebook and for the first time today on Instagram as well. Remember that you can also follow the U.S. Embassy at U.S. Embassy JA on Facebook, Twitter, now X, Instagram, and YouTube. Remember, if you have any questions that weren't covered in the Consular Conversations live session today, you can also always visit us at jm.usembassy.gov for further information. So, April, before we jump into the conversation today, how long have you been in Jamaica?
So I've been in Jamaica for the last 4 months or so. I came right at the end of July. This is my third tour. I have also served in Tbilisi, Georgia, as well as Washington, D.C.
Welcome, and I'm glad that you're able to enjoy all that tropical Jamaica has to offer. How have you found Jamaica? What is your favorite part of Jamaica so far?
Definitely the people of Jamaica are my favorite part. It has just been wonderful to be here and to get to live here and work with Jamaicans, both here at the embassy and out in the community. Jamaicans are such a warm and inviting people, and we are so pleased that we were able to be posted here. So
excellent.
Great thus far.
That's great to hear, and thank you very much for everything you and your unit is doing to clear the backlog of immigrant visa applications that we currently have. I understand that the immigrant visa unit schedules more than 2,000 interviews per month, and this has been doing a lot to reduce the current backlog time. So, April, could you please tell me, I've heard that Fiancé visas can now be processed. Is this true?
Yeah, so Fiancé visas are one of our priorities right now in the immigrant visa unit. Due to some lingering COVID backlogs, we still have a little bit of backlogs with our K visas. And so at this time, we're working to schedule our K visas backlog for the second week of January. And so by the end of January, we should be current with our K visas. This is a reminder to those of you out there with a K visa petition that's been approved that you can reach us at kingstoniv@state.gov by email in order to schedule your K1 visa interview. So very unlike the other kinds of immigrant visas, typically NVC will schedule you, but for K visas, you're special, you have to call us to schedule your interview. So as you go through your petition, if it's approved by NVC, please reach out to the U.S. Embassy to schedule your interview if you're a K1 applicant. Additionally, if you've had a K1 application that has been approved and you've been wondering, why haven't I heard from someone to schedule my interview, please reach out to us. We want to be able to interview you to get you into the United States.
Thank you, April. And just a reminder to those listening, this applies only to Fiancé visas. If you are waiting to hear back on any other type of immigrant visa class, your appointment is scheduled through the NVC, which is based in the US. So please do not reach out to the US Embassy with questions about your interview appointment time. Now, April, I heard that in order to get an immigrant visa, one needs to go through a medical exam. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for any immigrant visa, you'll have to go through a medical examination with a panel physician. The panel physician is designated by the U.S. Embassy here locally. And right now, all of our panel physicians are at Andrews Medical Center. So when you prepare for your immigrant visa interview and for the final stages of your immigrant visa process, you'll have to do your physical examination. So make sure that you reach out to Andrews whenever you need to schedule your medical, that is after your interview has been scheduled. We'd also like to note, if you're not able to do your medical exam before your interview, that's perfectly fine. What'll happen is you'll come to your interview, do your interview, and then you'll be in administrative processing until we get the medical exam results from Andrews. Andrews will send us the medical exam results directly, so you don't have to worry about anything with your results after you've done your medical exam. But do make sure that in preparation for your medical exam that you read the instructions from Andrews very carefully. Bring all of the relevant medical records as well as your vaccination records to your appointment, and make sure that if the panel physicians ask for any additional records or additional vaccinations or additional tests, that you get those done as soon as possible. If you don't get those done as soon as possible, it'll just result in further delays of processing your visa.
So April, I heard that applicants have, I believe, 6 months from the receipt of their visa to actually immigrate to the United States. Is that from the time of their interview, or is that from the time that they complete the medical exam?
It's from the time the medical exam takes place. So you have 6 months from the day that you see the panel physician to enter the United States should you get your immigrant visa. It's not from the 6 months from the day that you receive the visa. So be sure that when you get a visa that you look very carefully at the expiry date on the visa itself. That'll tell you the date that you need to enter the United States.
So that means that if there's a petition with many family members on it, the family should make sure that their appointments at Andrews are scheduled as close to each other as possible, correct? So that the timing works for the entire family.
Yeah, if that's the best way for you and your family to travel, do try to schedule your examinations close together. Andrews typically is able to accommodate those kinds of requests. However, regardless of when your family member does or yourself does the medical examination, do make sure you check that expiry date on your visa itself.
Thank you very much. April, now I also heard that it's necessary to provide police certificates during immigrant visa interviews. Now, who needs to provide a police certificate and where do they need to come from?
Right. So anywhere in the world that you have lived since age 16, we're going to need a police certificate from the local authorities or from the issuing authority for a police certificate of whatever country or place that you've lived in. So if you've lived in the Bahamas for a couple of years in your early 20s, we're going to want to see a police certificate from the Bahamas. If you've lived in Colombia when you were doing an exchange year, when you were in college, we want to see a police certificate from Colombia. The same is for here in Jamaica. If you've been here and you're over age 16, we need a police certificate. Now, your police certificate for U.S. immigration purposes will be valid for 2 years after it's been issued. So if you see an expiration date on your Jamaican police certificate or on your other country issued police certificate, if it's been at least 2 years since the issuing date, we will still consider it valid at this time for U.S. immigration purposes. So 16 and older, we need a police certificate. Anywhere you've lived more than 6 months since you were 16, we need a police certificate. Be sure that you request those in advance of your interview date so that you know you can provide them when you come to your interview.
And is it 6 months of continuous living or an aggregate? What if I visit my grandma in Trinidad for about a month every summer?
When you are a resident in another country, you should try and get a police certificate from that location. So if you've got 6 months or more of time spent in a country, we'll want to see a police certificate for that place.
What if where I lived, the courthouse burnt down and they don't have those records? What do I do then?
So this is a common complication. What we still want to see if we've requested police certificates or additional records from you is an official letter from the issuing entity explaining the situation. So if a consular officer says, I need to see the court documents for an arrest in the early 2000s, and you tell us, well, it seems that the courthouse burned down, I don't think I can get records, the court generally will still issue some kind of letter explaining the circumstances as well as the lack of records or the records that do still exist. So what we want to see are the official record, an official letter from the entity from which you can get your court documents or your police certificate.
Thank you, April. Speaking of missing documents, if someone is a legal permanent resident, they've already immigrated to the United States, but they travel here and they are visiting family or just are on vacation and they lose their green card, how did they get back to the United States?
That's a great question and something that happens frequently. So if you're abroad and you've lost or misplaced or can't find your permanent resident card, your green card, you can apply for something called boarding foil. A boarding foil is a document that serves as a travel document to re-enter the United States if you are a permanent resident already. If you've been out of the United States for under 1 year and you do not have your green card on you, you can apply for a boarding foil to serve as your travel document to re-enter the United States. Now, if you believe that your green card was lost or stolen abroad, we recommend you file a police report and you also let USCIS and the embassy know that your green card is missing. When you know that your green card is in a specific place, say in your house, and you've nearly forgotten it, you can try and see if a relative or a friend can send you that document to wherever you are in the world. Because a boarding foil can be quite an expensive document to acquire if you're a permanent resident. At this time, it is $575 non-refundable for the service of providing a boarding foil. The boarding foil itself is good for a single entry into the United States within 30 days from issuance. Typically, we here at Embassy Kingston are able to issue a boarding foil within a couple of business days, though that's not a promise. It always depends on our systems, et cetera. But if you are in a situation where you need to re-enter the United States, you're a permanent resident, and you simply don't have your green card on you, this is an option you can use to return to the United States.
So if you're here in Jamaica for the holidays with family and you realize you misplaced your green card, do remember that the price for a boarding foil is quite steep. So it may be worth considering reaching out to friends or family back home to see if they can mail it to you. While overnight FedEx or DHL shipments might seem expensive compared to the price of a boarding foil, it may be worth your while. Now, what if separately someone has their green card on them, but they've been outside the US for more than a year? What is that called, and does that mean that they can return to the US at any time?
So if you stay outside of the US for more than 1 year consecutively, you do run the risk of losing your permanent resident status in the United States. So if you have stayed outside of the United States for over a year and you still hold a valid green card, you run the risk of being refused entry into the United States. So what you would need to apply for is something called an SB1 visa or a returning resident visa. A returning resident visa is another travel document that will allow you to return to the United States if you're a permanent resident who has been outside of the United States for more than a year. However, there are some certain conditions with a returning resident visa. So we'll want to make sure that you were in fact a permanent resident of the United States when you departed, that you had status in the United States as a permanent resident. Then we'll want to know that when you departed the United States, regardless of when that was, that you had intention to return to the United States and that you had no intention to stay for an extended period of time outside of the United States. And finally, we'll want to assess whether or not the circumstances for which you had an extended stay outside of the US were out of your control. So those three elements are very critical to your returning resident visa application. When you apply for a returning resident visa or an SB1 visa, you will first put in your application to the U.S. Embassy, and you'll have a first interview with the consular officer in the immigration visa unit, who will determine whether or not you meet the criteria for that particular visa. If you meet the criteria for the visa, you'll come in for a second interview at a later date. But again, those visas are quite expensive, and because you have stayed outside of the United States for more than 1 year in order to first qualify for it, you do run the risk of being refused an SB1 visa if it appears that you had lost your status entirely while you were outside of the United States. So we highly recommend that if for whatever reason you have a long extended stay outside of the United States, make sure you're able to get back at some point before that 1 year mark. It saves a lot of grief in the end for many people, and it's a good practice if you are a permanent resident of the United States with a green card.
Thank you very much, April. That was very helpful. So we're roughly at the halfway point of our show. Before we move on to the Q&A and answer some of the questions that we have coming in from the various social media channels, please remember that you can always follow us at US Embassy JA on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Today we're streaming for the first time both on Facebook and Instagram. And I want to give a few public service announcements from the American Citizen Services section, as well as the non-immigrant visa section, before we continue with some immigrant visa Q&A. So the American Citizen Services section would like to highlight that the current travel advisory status is level 3, reconsider travel to Jamaica. That is because of the high level of crime here on island. Please remember that if you are considering travel to Jamaica, that there is a high level of violent crime. And to please consider purchasing travel insurance before traveling to Jamaica because of the condition of health facilities here at this time. Moreover, I'd like to remind those that are applying to travel to the United States that the wait time for non-immigrant visas continues to go down, but can range from anywhere from 1 day to 36 days at this time. So if you have any plans to travel to the United States in the new year, now is the time to go to the U.S. Embassy's website, jm.usembassy.gov, and to schedule an appointment for your non-immigrant visa interview. So we're going to jump to Q&A right now. We have Shelley asking about the backlog at Andrews Memorial for medical exams, and just to give some context there.
Right. So the demand for immigrant visas has risen, and our capacity here at U.S. Embassy Kingston to handle and adjudicate those visas has also increased. So we're going through some sort of systems adjustments right now of making sure that we can increase capacity across the entire chain of the immigrant visa process, which includes with Andrews. In the recent months, we've added on panel physicians who are able to conduct those required medical examinations in order to complete your immigrant visa process. But since there is an existing backlog, we still have to sort of wade through that before we're able to get current with our current immigrant visas. At this time, if you have to schedule your immigrant panel physician exam at a time that goes beyond your interview, like I said earlier, that's just fine. We're able to still interview you and work on your visa process, even if we don't have the exam finished, even if we don't have the exam results yet. Andrews will send us the exam results once you've completed all of the required parts of your medical exam. So if you have to book your medical exam further out past your actual interview, that's just fine, as long as you get the exam done.
Thanks, April. And it seems like Shelley has a follow-up question. She says she did the medical exam after the interview and now wants to know how she can send her passport back to the embassy.
Right, so you can go to the Document Service Center to send back your passport to the U.S. Embassy. If you have already done your interview, you should have received something we call a 221G sheet from the embassy. Include that sheet with your passport when you drop it off at the Document Service Center. By doing that, you help us keep track of your passport and keep track of your case documents, as we'll likely have some at the embassy, they'll have some at the Document Service Center, and Andrews, of course, will have the exam until they send it onward to us. So make sure that when you drop off any documents, you go to the Document Service Center with your 221G sheet, and you let them know that you are dropping your documents off for sending back to the U.S. Embassy for your IB case.
And Lorraine is asking if she needs to bring in a physical copy of the affidavit of support to the interview.
If your affidavit of support is already uploaded into the SEAC website, you do not need to bring a physical copy of the affidavit with you. However, if you have a new joint sponsor, if you have additional documents, if your petitioner has had a change and would like to resubmit the affidavit of support, it's good practice to just bring it in as a just in case we want to see it. So it's not going to hurt your case to bring in additional documents, such as a paper copy of the affidavit of support. But certainly if anything has changed with any of your financial sponsors, we'll want to see the documentation for that. So please try to have everything uploaded into the SEAC before you come to your appointment. But if you're unable to do that, or if you just want to make sure that we have the documents, feel free to bring in a paper copy.
Up next, we have Nikisha on Facebook asking if she can travel on the date that her immigrant visa expires.
Can you travel on the date that your immigrant visa expires? That is actually a tough one. Andrew, do you happen to know off the top of your head?
Yes, so working with colleagues in the immigrant visa section, they do tell me that this comes up from time to time, and your immigrant visa is valid up until the day of expiration. So Nikisha, make sure that you're actually going to arrive in the United States on the day of the visa expiration. If you have any connections on your planned travel itinerary, remember that there can always be delays, whether due to the airline itself or compounding factors such as weather. And so you really want to make sure that you're actually at the US border on the day of the expiration date of your immigrant visa. And of course, it's always best to travel before that, if at all possible, to avoid any situation where you would arrive after the visa expiration date. Separately, we have Shaf on Facebook asking if a friend received a suspicious letter claiming that their visa has been revoked, can they check the validity of their visa?
Yes, you can always reach out to Kingston IV or Kingston NIV to check that you still have a valid visa. We will have record of that in our systems, but do make sure that you go to the navigator on the U.S. Embassy website and find the correct code to include in your email before you message us through email. What we'll need is the correct code in the subject line of your message so that it gets to the right people who have the right insight at the embassy.
Thank you, April. And Shaf, remember to tell your friend that if it's an immigrant visa, then they should email Kingston IV at state.gov. If it's a non-immigrant visa, they should email Kingston NIV at state.gov. And it's very important to include as many biographical details as possible so that it can be easier to locate the particular visa in question. We often get emails in saying, hi, my mom lost her visa. What can you tell us about it? And please understand that from our perspective, we don't know your mom's name. We don't know her date of birth. We don't know when she came into the US Embassy for her appointment. And so the more details you provide, the easier it is for the consular section at the US Embassy to assist you or your family and friends. Shelley actually has a follow-up. You mentioned that she should bring her passport to the Document Service Center. She wants to know, where is that located?
Yeah, so the Document Service Center is on Ligonier Avenue. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact address right in front of me, but you can go to the U.S. Embassy website, or you can even Google Document Service Center Kingston, and you'll be able to find the information for the exact address.
Remember, the U.S. Embassy's website is jm.usembassy.gov, and you can find the appropriate information by using the drop-down menu on the right of the homepage. We now have a question from Omadai on Facebook. If you sent your passport to the embassy after the interview and the medical exam, how long does it take to get your passport back?
Right. So we'll need to see all of the documents for your complete case before we're able to adjudicate your actual visa. So that means I, as an adjudicating officer, need to see the passport, have it in my possession. I need to see the actual medical exam results. And those can actually take some time, anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks at this point in time is how long it takes Andrews to send us back your medical exam after you've completed sending in all of your documentation and have completed your exam itself. If there's any additional documentation, such as court documents or additional birth certificates, proof of relationship, etc., we'll need to see all of that before we're able to adjudicate the visa. If we adjudicate the visa and we've approved your application for an immigrant visa, you should receive the immigrant visa back within 7 to 10 business days after it's been approved. So if you want to make sure that your visa is adjudicated in the most expeditious manner, make sure that we have all of the documentation that we need. Read the instructions for Andrews so that you bring everything that you need for your medical exam to the appointment, and make sure you read the messages from the U.S. Embassy in advance of your interview to make sure that you have all of the relevant documentation ready for your interview before you come. The longer we have to go back and forth to request documents, or the longer we have to wait on you to acquire a police certificate or some other kind of documentation, just extends sort of the process itself. But I, as an adjudicator, can't adjudicate until I have everything in my possession. So make sure you get everything to us as quickly as possible.
Thank you, April. And that's a friendly reminder to all of those who have yet to have their interview. Please go through all the resources and checklists that you have to make sure that your file is as complete as possible. It might seem like just going to the interview itself is checking a box and moving forward somehow in the application process, but really it can actually slow things down, as April just said, if you come unprepared for your actual immigrant visa appointment. Separately, we have two last questions. So the first one is from Cheryl on Facebook. She says, my son's visa was not approved. Is there any way to appeal a visa decision?
If your immigrant visa was not approved, you are able to apply for an immigrant visa again. It's the same for NIV. If your non-immigrant travel tourist visa was not approved, you are able to apply again. Make sure that when you do go to apply for another visa, that you carefully consider your qualifications for that visa, whether if it's by family preference or an employment immigrant visa, you'll want to make sure that you have the requisite relationship in order to be eligible to receive that visa. And the same for NIV. Make sure that you are able to establish your ties to Jamaica, establish that you are going for travel purposes only, or for the purpose of the B1, B2 visa, or any other kind of non-immigrant visa that you apply for before you actually make the application. When you come to your interview, just make sure that you're prepared to answer the interviewing officer's questions. And if you aren't offered a visa at that time, like I said, you are able to apply for a visa again in the future.
Thank you. And you did cover the answer for the last question we have from Angela on Facebook, who asked about denial of tourist visas and if one can apply again. I'll just say briefly that it's not possible to appeal a visa decision. The consular officer's adjudication is final at the time of the interview or at the time of the adjudication decision. When you are denied a particular visa, you do receive a letter explaining which part of US law or regulations was applied in making that determination. So that letter should explain to you why your visa was denied. And as April mentioned, you can apply again, but make sure that your family or life circumstances meaningfully change. The visa application fees are substantial, And so it would not benefit you to just reapply immediately if nothing in your life circumstances have changed. Please make sure to consider this as you decide whether you should apply again for an immigrant or non-immigrant visa as it applies to your circumstances. We're now at the last minute of our show. I want to thank the audience. I want to thank April very much for coming here and explaining so much about the immigrant visa process. And I want to wish all of you a happy new year and happy holiday period. Remember, you can listen to us again on January 24th at 1 o'clock local time. You can also follow us at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at US Embassy JA. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your year.